Clubs, unions, and franchises. What's the difference? And who owns these clubs, franchises, and unions? If anyone has watched Super Rugby, you would know that it is a competition that is played by franchises. Sometimes you would hear the commentator saying that a certain player is returning from injury and was able to play a full game for their club side before coming back to their franchise. As a Southern Hemisphere boy, I understood this completely, as I played amateur club rugby in SA and Australia. And with SA teams in the URC and Europe now, I understand, but it still gets a little annoying when I hear the Northern lads calling the Bulls, Stormers, Lions, and Sharks clubs instead of franchises. I know it's nitpicking, but they are two levels above a club, and I'm going to tell you how and why there is a difference, but also why most of these franchises don't have an individual owner like American franchises. Let's start at the bottom. As I said earlier, I've played club footy in South Africa and in Australia. Generally, and there are exceptions, an amateur club has guys that come into a club and wish to play some rugger on the weekend. They sign up and pay their subscription fee to the club, which allows them to practice, play, and use the facilities. This usually allows the player to vote in a club annual general meeting of who should be the club president and other committee members, such as treasury and club captain. The committee, of course, runs the club and abides by its constitution and bylaws. Using the Western Cape as an example in South Africa, it has over 80 of these clubs. Now, of course, most of these clubs geographically will be close together, so they would really be within the same district or provincial area or state in terms of Australia. And this is normally called a union of all the clubs that are in this area. The union controls, runs, and delegates all the responsibilities of the leagues, and also sends a representative side to compete against other unions. And so this is where the confusion begins. I remember walking to watch Western Province play a game and overhearing an American tourist asking who owns Western Province. His friend that he was walking with didn't really know the answer, so I quickly shouted out that all the amateur clubs of Cape Town own the union. While this might not be true now, it did back in the day. Remember me saying that each amateur club had a president? Well, each of those presidents go to the union's AGM and vote for the union's committee. This comes from the amateur days of rugby union, and we've got to remember, rugby union only turned pro in 1995. Now, I know there's been a lot of talk recently of consortiums and other stakeholders that are trying to buy an interest in clubs like the Sharks and South African rugby in general, but we'll get to them later on. So just going back, let's recap. You had clubs in an area that combined and formed a union, which sent out a provincial team to play other unions. And so in South Africa, in the Currie Cup, there was up to 12 to 14 unions playing for this competition, with teams such as Western Province, Blue Bulls, Golden Lions, and smaller unions like Griquas, Southwest Districts, and the Mpumalanga Pumas. In New Zealand, for the ITM Cup and Run-of-Free Shield, big teams like Auckland, Wellington, Canterbury, with smaller sides such as Tasman and North Harbour. Australia also had this system, but it was mostly just Queensland and New South Wales, as Aussie rules dominated the rest of Australia in terms of a winter sport. And this is quite important, as it meant these guys were lacking serious competition outside of playing each other and needed to look elsewhere for some extra fixtures. Thus, in 1986, the South Pacific Championship was formed, with Queensland, New South Wales, 3 New Zealand teams, and the Fijian national team. In 1992, it became the Super 6, and then the Super 10 in 1993, with the South African teams joining. The original format of Super 10 was akin to the UEFA Champions League, with only the top 4 of New Zealand's NPC and only 3 of South Africa's best teams of the previous Currie Cup, and the winner of the Pacific Nations Tri tournament between Fiji, Tonga, and Samoa. Remember, Australia only had Queensland and New South Wales, and so they don't really need to have a qualifying tournament. This all changed in 1996. Rugby was now professional, and the competition got revamped as the Super 12. Australia would get a new state team, the Australian Capital Territory, the ACT Brumbies. New Zealand decided to end the Champions League format and combine all its provinces into 5 super teams. If we look at the Blues, we see how it was made up. Auckland would be the biggest contributor of players and money, but it would be supported by its neighbours of North Harbour and Northland. Now, obviously, you can see the benefits of this. You had a group of players already playing for Auckland, and then they would be sprinkled with the best players from the other 2 unions. Thus, the team would have more playing depth, and the smaller unions would financially gain by hosting some of the matches. And thus, the franchises were born. For the first 2 seasons of the Super 12, South Africa decided to keep the Champions League format, with only its top 4 sides entering from the previous Currie Cup. But it was clear to see that the provincial unions lacked the depth that the New Zealand and Australian teams had. Plus, the Champions League format meant that the best players could miss out on playing if their team finished 5th in the previous Currie Cup. This happened in 1997 as Western Province, which is one of the big powerhouses of South African rugby, did not qualify. So they had this team with so much star power, and they were playing their might against the smaller unions in a development competition that was running at the same time as Super Rugby. And so in 1998, South Africa decided to franchise. Now, their original plan did not work as well as New Zealand, and that deserves its own video. Plus, in recent days, the partnerships have changed a bit. Also, professionalism has meant that there has been a restructuring of the corporate side, with private equity companies now coming in. So to wrap up, this is how the makeup is in South Africa. You have amateur clubs that vote for the board of its unions, and the unions combine to create franchises, which today are the Lions, Sharks, Stormers, and Bulls. So the 4 teams that compete in the URC are not clubs, but franchises.